best.
I'll record it.
You're
I
the
promise
best.
to
You're the
upload
best.
this. Do you have enough room?
Blessed are they who come in the name of the divine. Bruchim habayim. Welcome to you all. We're so delighted to have such a beautiful gathering on such a beautiful day. And we want to especially welcome all of Bob Rottenberg's out-of-town guests, family and friends who have come from long distances, from Philadelphia and Ohio and other East Coast spots back in the old world of the East Coast. And it's an honor and a delight to have you all here this evening. I want to mention that Hadassah Harris Westcamper is our security monitor. This evening she's at the door, and in the very unlikely event of problems, we follow her directions. Understood? In the book of Numbers, we read of the 5 daughters of a man named Zelophehad who has died. Because he had no sons, his property would transfer to his brothers. But his daughters challenged the custom and request the inheritance go to them. Moses brings the claim to Hashem, to God, who responds, "The daughters of Zelophehad speak correctly." This is the ultimate validation. Immediately after spelling out new laws of inheritance, Hashem tells Moses to ascend Har Avarim, the mountain of crossing over, where he will see the land that Hashem is giving to the children of Israel, and then Moses will be gathered to his ancestors. Moses addresses God as Haruchot Lechod Basar, the spirits of all flesh. And Moses asks this great power to appoint a leader for the people, so they will not be like sheep who have no shepherd. Hashem replies, "Take to yourself Joshua son of Nun, a man in whom there is spirit, ish asher ruach bo, and lean your hand upon him, v'samachta et yelecha alav. You shall stand him before Eleazar the priest and before the entire assembly, and command him, charge him, connect with him before their eyes. You shall place some of your splendor upon him. Natata mehodecha alav, so that all the assembly of Israel will pay heed and will hear." The verb to lean is lisamech, from which we get the noun smicha, which has come to mean rabbinic ordination. In progressive Jewish circles, smicha is usually conferred upon completion of a course of study in a rabbinical program. But an older tradition holds that a person who has received smicha may bestow it on someone else. As many of you know, in my youth I had no ambition of becoming a rabbi. Becoming a rabbi was a blessing that overtook me after many years of serving the Jewish community here in Humboldt County. I was fortunate to have exceptional rabbinic mentors who offered me smicha. Many of you here today were present at my ordination 18 years ago, and I am deeply grateful for your ongoing support. I met Bob Rottenberg in Vermont several years ago. I had heard about him, that he had been the leader of that congregation, my brother's congregation, and that he also had a very beautiful Haftarah trope. I love beautiful melodies. So he was not leading the congregation at that time, but I was there on Shabbat, and I heard him chant this enchanting Hungarian music. And I fell for the Haftarah trope. But more importantly, I saw how warmly he was regarded by the people there, who greeted him as Rabbi, Rabbi Bob, and Rabbi, so good to see you. And when I visited Vermont last year, Bob was also there. I saw again how everybody greeted him with such love and respect. I heard from my relatives in Rottenberg how sad they were that their beloved Bob was moving away, and he disappeared. We heard that he was moving to California. California is a very big place. But one day at a Torah study, my dear sister Deborah was sitting there, and the new guy, Bob, was asked, "Oh, where are you from, Bob?" in a friendly way. And he said, "Oh, I'm from Brattleboro, Vermont." And Deborah said, "Oh, Daniel Kasnitz, my brother, who was the president of the congregation." And Bob said, "Oh my goodness, Daniel Kasnitz, of course." And then he realized that I was the rabbi here. Last fall, Bob mentioned to me that he would turn 75 the next year and would like to do something special. Maybe a new bar mitzvah or some special Torah reading. I thought, I can think of something very special. And I wrote him a very serious letter, asking him if he would do me the honor of considering to accept Simcha from me. He accepted, and we set about setting a date. Now, I'm not a person who, in general, gets her heart set on anything. I try to be happy with whatever comes my way. But 18 years ago, I longed to have my own Simcha ceremony on Tu B'Av, the 15th of the month of Av, because it's a somewhat obscure holiday we read about in the Talmud, but very joyous and very significant. I was all excited. I had the date, and my mentors were going to come. But then a good friend told me he was planning his wedding on Tu B'Av. So, of course, you don't want to disappoint the bride and the groom, and I surrendered the date to him. So Bob and I looked at the calendar, and we picked a weekend that we liked that was convenient for his family, and it happened to be Shabbat Nachmu, the Sabbath of consolation after Tisha B'Av, consoling us as we're on our way to High Holy Days. We picked the date, we had it all set, Shabbat Nachmu, and then we were looking at the calendar together, and I realized that this afternoon, before the sun goes down, is Tu B'Av. Nice. When I saw the Tu B'Av moon last night hovering over the city, I was ecstatic. So I have taken the initiative in asking Bob if he would do this, and in gathering all of you to come here. And I hope that, like the daughters of Tzalachad, if I say, Bob Rottenberg is a rabbi, I hope the spirit of all life will say, she speaks correctly. My teacher, Reb Zalman Alav Shalom, tells a story. A man came to the Kotzker Rebbe and said, Rebbe, my father came to me in a dream, and he told me I should become a Rebbe. The Kotzker laughed. And the man said, what's the joke? The Kotzker answered, if your father had come to 300 people in a dream and told them that you were to be their Rebbe, I would take it a little more seriously. Reb Zalman says, here's what the teaching means. First, the divine flow, then the community, and then, only then, the focus point, the Rebbe. The Rebbe results from the divine flowing into the world, working through a community that, in a sense, makes for itself a Rebbe. And we have this beautiful image of the flow of inspiration. And we have a little hierarchical imagery here. Reb Zalman also said, Simcha comes from above, from the teachers and the rabbis who have come before you, and also from below, from the congregation. In that image of it coming from above, there's a story of Reb Moshe Kabbaner. And a chassid approaches him and says, Reb Moshe, I've known you since you were a child. I know all your secrets. I know all the things you did wrong. I know all your shortcomings. And I'm supposed to take you as my Rebbe? And the Kabbaner says, no, all you have to do is believe that I'm a kletzel hecher from dir, just a little bit higher than you. Reb Zalman says, because if you don't believe some of that, the hashpa'ah, the flow of divine inspiration, won't come down and won't flow to you. And so, we have the great honor of many of Bob's longtime friends, people who have collaborated with him over the years, and people whom he has served, to come and attest to his qualifications for receiving this honor. So that we'll know that he is just a kletzel hecher, just a little bit higher, perhaps, than most of us. I am quite honored and delighted now to invite Reverend Van Opperman to come to join me on the bima. One plan is for you to sit here. And the first guest I would like to call is Richie Davis, who is a journalist from Western Massachusetts. Come, Richie, dear. And, Magid David Arfa. David is going to read the text that Richie sent, because Richie was not able to be with us today. So, we will enjoy something from
bring Richie here to let everyone know. Richie is this crackerjack reporter. Spends his life really devoted to the free press and sharing information in our communities, making it available, and a wonderful drummer as well. There was once a Middle Eastern band, we needed a drummer that came to the Temple of Israel, Greenfield. They said, no, our rhythms are tough, you know, and Richie's like, I can handle it, and they're of course blown away by Richie's drummer. So this is for Richie Davis. This is what he wrote for Bob. The rabbi of Nemirov disappeared every morning during the days of Shlichut prayers. He could not be seen anywhere. He was not in the main synagogue. He was not in the two smaller houses of prayer. And he was definitely, absolutely not at home. His house was empty. Where could he be? Well, to be clear, Bob Rottenberg is definitely, absolutely not the Rebbe of Nemirov. In fact, well, he's not even officially a rabbi. Yet. And yet I've long considered Bob Rottenberg to be my rabbi, Reb Bob. That's what I dubbed him in the days when he was an esteemed member of my 20-something-year-old men's group, along with another great friend, the late Bob Stowe, who was a congregational minister, who I called Rev Bob. I'd already known Bob for at least a couple of decades, from the time he came into the newsroom where I was working to introduce himself and be introduced as the head of a new regional recycling project, and then the administrator of our regional transit authority. He later became director of the new regional solid waste management district, while also serving on the board of the transit authority, which was also the subject of frequent news and feature articles that I wrote as the newspaper's energy and environmental reporter. But Bob, who I was told, also had created a chavurah in the hills, also became a close friend. It inspired me as I watched him raise his children over the years, as I saw the loving care he provided for his wife Karolka during the long illness before her death, the devoted way he helped our rabbi, Louis Reiser, as the Temple Israel's Gabbai, and the perfect balance that he always seemed to bring between spiritual practice, even temperament, good humor, and deep wisdom as he navigated through life's difficult passages. Reb Bob didn't so much wrestle with God. It was like everything washed gently over him and modestly arrived at a resolution that showed the kind of patience, clear-mindedness, and sublime perspective that the Rabbi of Nemirov might have had. When Rebbe Bob served as our congregation's spiritual leader, for example, I remember taking part on the Bima and the Yizkor service, one Yom Kippur afternoon, and after escalating Israeli hostilities, left dozens of Palestinians dead. One after one, we read their names, also as part of a controversial observance that very few other Jewish religious leaders would have dared to lead. I took part in Shabbat services that Bob led in a tiny zendo, where we sat on meditation cushions with the Tibetan monks whose portraits on the walls surrounding us were an integral and esteemed part of our minyan. And when my men's group chewed over the difficult life passages that our members were going through, severe health issues, parenting dilemmas, and deaths, I would sit in awe as Reb Bob, after sitting quietly, eating his dinner with us, would put down his chopsticks and make an observation and be just so focused, so astute, that any other comment would seem was meaningless. Bob has continued to observe Shabbat through the years, davening on the town commons, davening with his goats, davening in silent retreat, and always with seemingly infinite patience and seichel, showing himself to me as a true mensch. That's why now when I recite my own 20-minute meta meditation, I end with the phrase, and may I keep Bob, and also my Bubby Rachel, with me always as my own spiritual guidance. With his long overdue ordination, Reb Bob really will be Rabbi Bob. And like the Rabbi of Nemirov, whose magical mitzvots left villagers wondering where he'd gone, Bob Rottenberg is always, thankfully, fully present. Mazel tov, Bob. May your home is never empty.
We'll hear from David some more tomorrow morning. Yes, thank you so much. Next, I'm honored to invite Reverend Doug Wilson, who is a Unitarian minister from Roe, Mass., and I know he has some stories about the early years. Got Doug here? Doug, there you go.
Good evening. I was born in British Columbia and moved to Santa Barbara when I was 5. When I graduated from UC Santa Barbara in 1967 with a major in religious studies and philosophy, most of the employment opportunities were in Southeast Asia. So I dodged the draft into divinity school at Star King School for the Ministry, a Unitarian Universalist school in Berkeley. I was 20, and I believe I was the youngest person ever to enter the school. When I graduated in 1970, most of the employment opportunities were in Southeast Asia, where the CIA continued to engineer the murder of the people and the land of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So when I was offered a job as the assistant minister of the First Unitarian Church of Brooklyn, I said, Brooklyn's in New York City, right? That would be a yes. And I said, okay, even if the Dodgers had moved to Los Angeles. The next spring, I was ordained at the age of 24, but I barely had any idea what that meant. In 1973, I left Brooklyn and hiked the Appalachian Trail, stopping to visit a minister who had sent 4 of her kids to Row summer camp. I learned that the camp had just bought the farmhouse next door and offered to live in the house over the winter while I looked around for another church. In the spring of 1974, I asked the board of Row Camp if I could start a conference center in the fall, winter, and spring in the farmhouse, and in the summer we would return to being Row Camp. The board said, "What's a conference center?" So I told them about Esalen Institute. Having grown up in California myself, I knew about Esalen. And they didn't know what else to do with the farmhouse. They had this idea that churches were going to rent the place and have retreats there. But if you look at a map, you will realize that was ridiculous. About as far away as you can get. Just after moving to Row, I met Bob Rottenberg, who was a very likable, easygoing guy who just moved to Western Massachusetts from New York City, where he had grown up. I liked him right away, as he was the same level-headed, kind fellow he still is. In the next year, Bob started inviting people to break bread together on Friday nights. Most Friday nights, I was hosting the beginning workshops of our conference center, but sometimes I'd join the group of Bob's friends. For many years, Bob continued to offer Shabbat services every Friday night, moving to different people's houses, where Bob presided with his open-hearted way. It is the opposite of proselytizing. You can take it or leave it. But Jews were looking to connect with something that was a little beyond what they had experienced before. I also became the director of Row Junior High Camp, and there were a fair number of what we called Junitarians. Most UU organizations are open to experiencing other people's paths, so I began to invite Bob to do Shabbat at the 2 Friday nights of the 3-week junior high camp. Many young people turned out to be very receptive to being reintroduced to what that faith that so many of them had abandoned after their bar or bas mitzvah. Some of you may have been in that group too. Bob learned that he was providing a simple way for what many people needed, a simple way to collaborate and celebrate being Jewish. My friendship with Bob continued to grow as he became the Rebbe of the Hills, as we called him. In my idea, being a Rebbe is way better than being a rabbi. But I'm honored to be here and to celebrate something that was and remains sacred ground. Too many people in the Jewish faith sort of stop being involved after their bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. And Bob was committed to helping people grow out of that as he became the Rebbe of the Hills. When I was starting the conference center, I asked one of the elders what kind of workshops would draw people. And he suggested that I look for groups with shared interests, like gays and lesbians. And Jews were another group. And I started inviting people like Shlomo Carlebach, Michael Lerner, Lynn Gottlieb, and especially Reb Zalman. Because I wasn't familiar with this tradition, I asked Bob to host the weekends with a Jewish theme, and he knew what to do. Zalman became a regular, usually coming to do Rosh Hashanah. Zalman's workshops were very popular, and they tended to come once a year for many, many years. It was a time when Jews in America were looking for ways to be more directly in touch with the wisdom and rituals that had carried Jews through millennia. And we were in the group. What they were doing was coming together to do what Jews around the world and throughout the ages have always done. Light candles, say a few blessings over the wine and challah, sing some songs, study some Torah, and enjoy a good meal and good company. These weekly gatherings grew, and it soon became clear that we were unintentionally providing something that many people seem to crave, a simple way to celebrate their Jewishness, unencumbered by organized guidelines. Some people started asking Bob to help them create a Jewish event, a bar or bas mitzvah, a wedding, there we go, sorry, even a conversion, all coming when people who, for one reason or another, didn't feel comfortable going to the local synagogue. This isn't the first time he has been honored. He made his living being a high-level administrator of the bus lines and transportation system in Franklin County, and later setting up the entire recycling system. He knew how to do stuff. I try to avoid things like that. He also became the Rebbe of the Greenfield Church for some years and held forth there. They essentially elevated him out of their congregation. In a way, I think that's similar to the way you are elevating him, although this has a different twist. When the people in the Greenfield Church knew and loved him, but when Bob's wife Karoka died of ALS after a long, sad journey, Bob left town and became a wanderer, finally ending up here, where the rabbi couldn't help but see that what Bob had to offer, and invited him to this formal, recognized him as a diamond in the rough, and invited him to join in this ceremony, though in my heart, I know he's always been both a Rebbe and a rabbi. I can't help but see that I got ordained way before my time. and Bob is getting ordained way after me. So it goes. I'm honored to be here, and I honor your Rabbi, Naomi, for recognizing this diamond in the rough that we have here. And that's the rough cut.
You took my page.
Oops,
You
sorry.
took my list, that's all right. That's all right, we haven't got it.
Okay.
Ah, that conference center, of course, is legendary now. We are also delighted to have Reverend Nick Comstock, a congregational minister retired, also from Western Mass, and Nick is part of the ongoing Talmud study group, which you do online. Nick, please join us.
So Bob, I also have a message from Richie Davis. He said to me, he said, give the Rebbe a hug for me. So here we go. So she has said that I was a part of the Talmud group. I was at the beginning of the Talmud group, and I want to say something about why it began and how it began, if I got it right. And that is that a friend of Bob's had a stroke. And so the Talmud group was gathered around him, first of all, and continued to be with him until a year ago. And it was just for a group of people to be able to talk together about, well, when we started, I've been a part of this for 12 years, except for 10 years that I wasn't a part of it, in the middle. Which means that I never studied Talmud. We studied some Torah and some prophets, and now we're studying together Abram Heschel. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful group. But I'm the wrong guy to really talk about it, except for one thing, and that is that when Bob left, it felt like there was a great hole in our lives, and by the miracles of electronics, we have him in our living room every 2 weeks, and your brain does something with that. So it's just like he's there, but he's also still our teacher. So but I want to tell you about another part of our life together. First of all, my wife Linda and Karoka were the ones who brought us together in the first place, because they worked together as social workers. And so I think we first met at a dinner at your house. But then later, I think, tell me if I have this right, but there's a small school in the town of Charlemont called Charlemont Academy, and my son went there, and I think, Becca, did you go? Lige went, right. And one of the ways that we were able to afford our children going to this school was that they would ask us to teach. And so Bob and my job was to organize a world religions course that was for a quarter of the year for seniors. And so we were able to, because it's a really remarkable place that we live, almost like California, where we could find Muslims and we could find Buddhists and we could find whoever we needed to teach in this course. And then Bob and I got to teach Bible together. And what I want to say is that for me this was an enormously important thing. First of all, to hear the Torah, to hear, how can I say this? To see the Torah through Jewish eyes. It was the gift of Bob, because my training was always in Christianity, and so one of the gifts was that. But I'll tell you how that it evolved, and that is that to be a liberal Christian minister in the era that I've been one, has been to be in a place of lostness for us. And we're actually beginning to find our way out of our lostness. And what I went through with Bob is a part of our finding our way out of our lostness, because, and I'll illustrate it with a story. We every year would be teaching, trying to teach these kids stuff out of the Bible, or to engage them with the Bible. And these were mostly Christian kids, I think. And they were mostly kids, when we first started doing this, there were kids whose parents had gone to church as children, but did not take them to church. By the time we were done, we were teaching kids whose grandparents had gone to church as children, but hadn't taken their own parents. So these kids, they would come up to the Bible, and suddenly you could feel the brakes go off. And they were having such difficulty being able to engage with the Bible, and we finally discovered that the problem was that when they saw the Bible, they thought that they had to decide whether they believed it or not. You remember? And so we worked with that a couple of years and struggled with it, and we couldn't help them find their way in. And finally, we cooked this up. We said one day, these kids are really smart kids, and they'd studied a lot of literature, and we said, this is what I said, this is my line. My line was, well, you know what's required to be a good reader of fiction. And they said, yes, they did know, a willing suspension of disbelief. And then their eyes lit up, because they said, oh, is this fiction? And then Bob said, no, because this requires a willing suspension of belief. And once we took that load off of their shoulders, and maybe our own, suddenly they were free to kind of go into these stories and begin to experience the richness. And one example I want to tell you about of how they did one year a play, Noah. Remember Noah? And it was a wonderful play, but it had this moment in it. You know how Noah ends with God saying, I'm never going to do that again, the rainbow covenant. But the way that they got this into the story, into the middle of the story, was at the moment when the ark was leaving, and all of those people were starting to drown, they had the people on the ark reaching and trying to pull them in. And you could get the feel that they had felt the compassion of God in that story. It was a very, very rich experience. That's really the thing I wanted to share. But I want to say also that it was a moment in my own trying to find my way into this. Because for us, liberal Christian ministers, the rediscovery of the story has been really, really important. And the way that Bob had recounted for us the minion. And there's a joke about the minion that you know, and it's a joke, but he says it's made up of 10 men and 2 rabbis who disagree with each other. But I don't know whether that's true, but it's a good joke. And, but the thing of it is that if it's one minister who gets to run things, you're tied up in doctrine. But if it's 10 people who are getting together into the story, then you're into the stories. And here's what I have learned, starting learning it with Bob and bringing it to this late point in my life, is that the question of truth in Scripture is at the place where the Bible stories intersect with our story. And at that moment, the truth is a living truth and not doctrine. So, and I learned it from him.
We're also very honored and delighted to have Bob's brother Dan, who's has come all the way from Philadelphia.
Bob's big brother there.
Dear Brother Bob, for months now, you've been apprehensive about your approaching rabbinic ordination, and for good reason. Our ancestors deliberately designed this ancient ritual so that only the very strongest and most dedicated among us would survive its unique combination of physical pain and psychological humiliation. Now that you have survived this ordeal, you're probably wondering, was it worth it? My answer to you is a resounding yes, for today begins an exciting new chapter in your life. Armed with a degree bestowed upon you by Rabbi Steinberg, not to mention the blessings she has transmitted to you in her capacity as the earthly incarnation of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, you are now poised to seize a whole new world of exciting opportunities. Starting Monday, you will finally be able to lead a congregation. You can conduct services. You can deliver sermons. You can officiate at weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, and bat mitzvahs. You can teach Hebrew school. You can prepare bar and bat mitzvah candidates. You can even... Wait a minute. You've already done all these things. You've been doing them longer than most ordained rabbis have. You were doing them before many practicing ordained rabbis were born. You officiated at my daughter's wedding back before the turn of the century. You officiated at our father's burial. And much like the rabbinic sages of medieval Europe, wherever you have traveled, communities have sprung up spontaneously around you. Your followers are drawn to you, I think, not by any formal credentials you may possess, but by the sincerity of your personal quest for spiritual fulfillment, as well as the wisdom you have acquired in the process. But unlike those medieval rabbinic sages, your quest has actually transcended the limits of Judaism. I remember a time when your weekend routine often consisted of a visit not only to a synagogue, but also to a Buddhist ashram and a Protestant church. Just last month, you spent the weekend at a Unitarian retreat. I also recall that in junior high school, you successfully completed a correspondence course in Catholic theology offered by the Paulist Fathers. And of course, you spent 6 years in a school operated by that hotbed of atheism, the New York Society for Ethical Culture. That organization's motto, "The place where people meet to seek the highest is holy ground," could serve as your slogan as well. You are, in fact, the living embodiment of a famous remark by the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. He said, if everyone is a Lutheran, then no one is a Lutheran. And what he meant was that if everyone you know shares your same worldview, you'll never have the opportunity to develop genuine belief, because your convictions won't be subjected to scrutiny. I can personally attest to the wisdom of your approach. The most profound insight I ever gained in a synagogue did not come from a rabbi or even from a Jew. Some years ago, my rabbi in Philadelphia got the inspired idea to trade pulpits for a weekend with an African-American Methodist minister from South Philadelphia. This preacher ascended the bema And the first words out of his mouth were, "I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior." As you can imagine, all of us in the congregation were rolling our eyes and looking at each other and wondering, what have we let ourselves in for here? Well, then this minister looked out at us and he said, "That may not work for you, but it gets me through the day." And that pretty much said it all for me. About not only religion, but also about politics, political viewpoints. As long as your philosophy doesn't harm others, the packaging is really irrelevant. What matters is whatever belief gets you through the day. Now, you come by your search honestly. Our grandfather, Mark Rottenberg, rejected both God and Judaism when he was 17, after his father died suddenly of pneumonia at the age of 58. His actual words, which he told me, were, he said, "If God allows something like this to happen, I don't want anything to do with it." Ultimately, Mark did return to the faith after finding that the Torah worked very well for him if he replaced the word God with the word ideal. That is, that the term God represents not some supernatural heavenly force, but the ideals to which people aspire. This was the essence of the Reconstructionist creed later developed by Mark's friend and hero, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan. You also carry the genes of our 13th century ancestor, the German Rabbi Meir ben Baruch of Rottenberg, who for 40 years produced a steady stream of brilliant Talmudic scholars from the yeshiva he operated in his home. Although Meir himself held no official position, he didn't even have a congregation, he is said to have functioned as a de facto one-man Supreme Court for the Jews of Central Europe, who sent him their disputes and their problems to resolve, and who abided by his decisions, not because they had to, but because they so highly respected his scholarship and wisdom. Like Grandpa Mark, you have repeatedly rediscovered Judaism on your own, and Judaism is the stronger for your quest. And like Meir of Rottenberg, you have attracted followers without the benefit of official title or trappings. On the surface, you and I have followed very different paths in our lives. You're the country mouse, I'm the city mouse. You've led a peripatetic, bi-coastal life with a succession of mates. I've remained in the same city, in the same conventional marriage for decades, yet we share some important characteristics. I refer, of course, to our mutual fondness for liquor, cigars, and chorus girls. I threw that in there to make sure everybody's paying attention. But seriously, both of us are engaged in the never-ending search for truth. Both of us derive strength from our respective communities. Both of us, like our parents and our grandparents before us, hope to leave the world a better place than we found it. And both of us have survived and even flourished without the benefit of formal credentials beyond a bachelor's degree. So, contrary to my facetious opening words, and I suspect, as I suspect you already understand, this ordination ceremony changes nothing. It merely acknowledges what all of us know. You're already a rabbi, and you have been for some time. Even more important, you have been a role model for anyone who aspires to lead a moral and spiritual life in this modern technological age. So, by all means, do pause today to pat yourself on the back for a job well done. As our family once sang to Grandpa Mark on his 80th birthday some 45 years ago, your friends and kin from far and near have come to tell you that you have no peer. Gilbert Sullivan. But on Monday, I hope you will resume what you've been doing all along, searching for truth, wisdom, and love in the best ecumenical tradition of T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
I've also invited David Levy-Boyd, there you are, who's a member of the board of directors of Temple Beth El and the chair of our Claudia Style Committee, and has collaborated with Bob on various projects, and I hope David will speak about that, those collaborations.
Well, following those wonderful testimonies from folks that have known and loved Bob for decades, I feel a little inadequate as one of Bob's newest friends to shed any additional light on Bob's experience as a new rabbi. But I'll do my best. We're here to celebrate Bob's ordination as a rabbi, and I speculate that because of that occasion, most of us are looking at Bob through the lenses of his spirituality or his religious practice. We think of his serene presence, his scholarship, his service as a lay leader or a teacher. But I had the opportunity to get to know Bob in a different way. Bob and I intersected because of our shared interest in social justice. Thinking about what to say this evening, it occurred to me, though, that Bob's concern for social justice really wasn't distinct from his spirituality. In fact, it's an extension of it, a necessary manifestation of his values. Much like, as was mentioned earlier, Rabbi Joshua Heschel, who, when marching with Martin Luther King in Selma, remarked that he was praying with his feet. Bob and I came together as co-founders of a local chapter of J Street. As Jews and Americans, we both have deep concerns about the situation in Israel and Palestine. We both want to see a secure, peaceful, and democratic Israel, and we want to see justice and dignity for Palestinians. Bob brought both a critical mass and a gravitas to our J Street efforts. And I'm comfortable in saying, without his involvement, our local chapter very likely may not have happened. Growing out of our J Street work, Bob and I decided to team teach a class at the Humboldt State University Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, known locally as OLLI. Our first class was called Pathways to Peace, which was followed by a 6-week film series called 50 Years of Occupation. Bob and I had very different life experiences. We had very different paths that brought us together. And it's natural that our understandings of the history, complexity, and the politics of the region were different. To bring focus and alignment into our class, we spent a lot of time getting to learn about each other and the situation. We spent time researching, questioning, dialoguing. Dare I say, it was almost Talmudic in approach. For me, that was an extremely enjoyable time. By the end, we had developed a shared understanding and a shared vision, which strengthened our class and resulted in a most pleasurable teaching experience. It occurred to me, Bob, that I may not have expressed my gratitude for your involvement adequately. So I'd like to take the opportunity tonight to say thank you. And all of the above is to say, as you grow into your new persona as a legitimate rabbi, and with the delightful developments in your personal life, I just want to ask that you continue to reserve a little bit of your time for praying with your feet.
Oh.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I feel it's also appropriate, you know that rabbis usually like to have something to say. So I thought it might be appropriate to give Bob a few minutes so he can share his thoughts with us on this occasion.
Wow. Well, perhaps some of you may remember a wonderful movie from the late 90s called Michael. John Travolta played an angel, but the kind of angel who constantly raised eyebrows by his drinking, his smoking, his womanizing, and horror of horrors, his dancing. When confronted by people who said he defied their expectations of an angel, Travolta replied, "I'm not that kind of angel." As I'm about to receive Simcha from Rabbi Naomi, I want to take this opportunity to share with you something of how I came to be standing here today, and to maybe answer some questions of what kind of rabbi I hope to become. And like John Travolta's angel character, no matter what you may imagine a rabbi to be, there's a good chance that I'm not that kind of rabbi. So settle back. Come with me as I trace a journey that has consumed much of my 75 years on this planet. I grew up, as my brother Dan mentioned, attending the first Reconstructionist synagogue, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, in New York City. My grandparents, Mark and Rosalie Rottenberg, were active members, and I would sit with them in the choir section during many services. Mordechai Kaplan, who founded the Reconstructionist movement in the 1920s, was still alive and very active in those days. Listening to him speak was, to this preteen youngster, as close to hearing the voice of God as I could imagine. Of course, Kaplan himself would disagree vehemently with my assessment, as he made it very clear that God does not have a voice that we can hear with our ears. We have to listen to something other than our ears, he would say. One memorable Shabbat, Kaplan led us in reading a prayer in English, in which we substituted the phrase, the education of the conscience, whenever the text called for God. It was a very cumbersome prayer. As far as I know, we did it only once, but I was hooked. Another Kaplan gem that has carried me through the years was, the past has a vote, but not a veto. Kaplan ingeniously played with the Kabbalistic practice of moving vowels around to change the meaning of words or phrases. Yes, listen to the past, but don't let it run your life. I stayed hooked. Fast forward some 17 years after I became bar mitzvah. It was 1974, and I attended a 10-day yoga and meditation retreat with Swami Satchidananda on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island. One evening, someone asked the Swami whether Jews were truly the chosen people. Not the least put off by what seemed like an out-of-place question, he, in true Jewish fashion, answered the question with a question of his own. Who is a Jew? The Swami asked. When more than a few hands were gathered in response, the Swami clarified, no, I mean, what is it that makes a Jew a Jew? And he went on, again in true Jewish fashion, to provide his own answer. A Jew is someone who chooses God above everything else. So, he continued, the Jews are the choosing people. They constantly choose to put God first in their lives. Boy, was this Jewish kid hooked. During those 10 days, many of the folks there were moving toward receiving initiation from the Swami. I, however, found myself thinking more and more of Jewish themes, Jewish ideas, Jewish mantras. Perhaps, as never before, the fact that I was truly Jewish became crystal clear to me. I left the retreat resolved to go to rabbinical school. But, as life has a way of poking fun at our plans, I wound up far away from the only rabbinical school worth considering at that time, which was the Reconstructionist Rabbinical School in Philadelphia. And I, as we've heard from my good friend Doug, was in a very rural part of western Massachusetts. And as Doug has explained, I spent about 30 years where, little by little, my life was propelled toward, as Rabbi Naomi has said, doing rabbi work, if not actually being formally recognized as a rabbi. At one point in this journey, I officiated at the funeral of my grandmother, and one of the attendees was my former rabbi at the SAJ, Alan Miller, of blessed memory. He knew me very well and was aware of my unorthodox relationship to Judaism. After the funeral, he pulled me aside and said, "If you want smicha, I'll give it to you right here, right now."
Wow.
But, he added, "you don't need it."
Wow.
He was the only person who could have said that to me and have really mean something. That message carried me for many years until now. Now I feel ready to accept Rabbi Naomi's generous offer, which she made almost a year ago, and to formally accept the title that so many people have accorded me for so many years. And the question surfaces again, what kind of rabbi do I want to be? We Jews tend to describe God not by what God is, which we can never really know, but rather by what God isn't. We have a very long list of all the things God is not. And I could give you a long list of all the rabbi things I don't want to be. But what kind of rabbi do I want to be? Many years ago, I added the name Aaron to my Hebrew name. Why? Aaron was a very flawed person who was given the tremendous responsibility of becoming our first high priest and overseeing the creation of a bureaucracy that would help a group of former slaves become a truly free people. Aaron is also remembered as someone who constantly strove to bring peace to his people, to help them transform the teachings of his brother Moses into a living and breathing way of life. I take very seriously the charge in my smicha document. It calls me to be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and bringing people close to Torah. I don't care who you are or what your background or belief system is. I feel very confident that I can sit with you and address your questions and concerns about life in the context of what Torah and our sages have taught, perhaps as Aaron himself did. I don't want to convert anyone, far from it. I just want to let you know that whatever you're looking for, it's addressed somewhere in our scriptures. And I want to share it with you in a way that hopefully doesn't cause you to run screaming out of the room. My friends, we are at a critical time, both in the Jewish calendar and in our wider world. As Rabbi Naomi has said, we are at what's known as Shabbos Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort. It comes on the Shabbos following Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, which was last Sunday. This is the day that commemorates many of the major disasters that our people have suffered over the millennia. Death, destruction, deportation, you name it. It's a major fast day when folks refrain from most life-affirming activities and sit on the floor surrounded by ashes. Tough stuff. Our sages said that life must go on, no matter what disaster may come our way. But they also taught that there is a ray of hope on this day of remembering the disasters. This is the day, they claim, on which the Messiah is born. Now, Being a good disciple of Mordecai Kaplan, I don't believe in a Messiah per se, an individual who will single-handedly bring about a kingdom of God. No. But I do believe very strongly in the messianic redemption, which can only be brought about by all of us not only hoping for a better future, but by doing everything in our power to bring it about. Which means it's up to us to nurture that messianic hope by actively seeking to transform our world of sorrow into a world of hope and love. Tomorrow, my sweetheart Suzanne and I will chant the opening lines of a beautiful and sublime teaching from the prophet Isaiah, predicting the destruction of the temple and all the upheaval that would accompany it. Isaiah channels a God who says, comfort. Comfort, oh, comfort my people. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and declare to her that her term of service is over, her sins are forgiven. Notice who is being asked to do the comforting. At a time when we might expect or want God himself to give us the comfort we so want and need, God tells Isaiah that he must be the source of that comfort. The same prophet who predicted the disaster that was just around the corner. This is not the time for guilt tripping, for blame, or for hiding while we lick our wounds, Isaiah said. No, what is needed is comfort. And we must be the source of that comfort. Don't look to God to do what we must do for each other. Isaiah's words ring out so clearly these days, as we see so many people in such dire need of comforting, be they refugees fleeing death and destruction in their native lands, as so many of our own ancestors did when they came here. Be they people who simply want a job that pays a living wage or an affordable place to live. Be they people who simply want to vote. Be they people who want to know that medical assistance will be available when they need it and that they can afford it. People who want to know that their leaders care about them, that their voice matters, that they can feel welcome, feel held, feel cared for. In short, to feel comforted in spite of all the trauma they have faced and will continue to face. Isaiah's comforting vision continues. Like a shepherd, God pastures his flock. He gathers the lambs in his arms, carries them in his bosom. Gently, he drives the mother sheep. Such comforting words from Isaiah, and in such need right now. Today is a day of celebration for me. It's a day of celebration for me, having come to this stage of my life where I can actually accept this awesome gift of ordination. For us as a community, for my family and close friends who have traveled so far to be with us today. A day to celebrate our blessings while we confront our challenges. If Isaiah were with us here today, this is what I imagine he would say. Yes, celebrate all the blessings. Celebrate the bounty of your lives. Celebrate each other. But above all, remember to give comfort where it is most needed. To not turn our backs to those who are in need of comfort and support. So my friends, here I am, well into my 75th year of life, and you still ask, what kind of rabbi do I want to be? Here's what I can tell you. A rabbi who yearns more than anything else to find those words of comfort to share at a time when comforting words are in such short supply and are so very much needed. A rabbi who wants to scour our sacred texts and our traditions and our observances, searching for those words and deeds that can soothe our tired and bruised souls. A rabbi who knows his own shortcomings, but who pledges to not let them get in the way of providing comfort to those who need it. A a rabbi who strives to be of the disciples of Aaron, a rabbi who loves peace and who loves bringing people close to Torah. I feel so blessed to be standing in your presence today. I ask your blessing as I take this step into becoming a rabbi, as I continue my quest to become the best Bob Rottenberg I can possibly be, so that I can live up to this awesome title that I have been chasing for so many years, this title that you bestowed on me today. Thank you for sharing this journey.
In the Talmud, we read, "Be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving all living beings and drawing them close to the Torah." Coming close to Torah is the quintessential Jewish experience. Whether we think of the Torah as the 5 books of Moses written on the Torah scroll in the beautiful ark, or we think of Torah as the sum total of Jewish wisdom. Throughout our long history, Jewish communities have studied Torah and flourished in many different parts of the world. Even before the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era, Jews had settled across the Roman Empire, and we have made our way to the Iberian Peninsula, to the golden shores of Spain. But by the year 409, the Roman Empire was weakened by civil and ethnic strife, corruption, military overspending, and financial instability. All of this paved the way for the fall of Rome in 410, the sack by the Germanic Visigoths, who extended their rule to Spain and embittered the lives of the Jews there with forced conversions under the threat of death or expulsion. This went on for nearly 300 years, until the year 711, when, with the help of Berber warriors from Morocco, the Muslim Umayyad dynasty of Damascus routed the Visigoths and began centuries of Muslim rule in the land they called Al-Andalus. The Jews welcomed the Muslim conquerors as liberators. In 756, a charismatic Umayyad prince, Abdurrahman I, escaped the murder of his family in Damascus by the rival Abbasid clan and fled to Al-Andalus, where he quickly acquired followers, prevailed in battle, and reestablished his family dynasty. The Umayyads ruled for over 200 years, ushering in the golden age of Spain, in which Abdurrahman III declared himself caliph and ruled from the glittering cosmopolitan city of Cordoba, served by his close Jewish counselor, Chazdai ibn Shahut, who was both doctor and diplomat. It was a time of great prosperity and creativity in scholarship, science, and the arts. The library of Cordoba boasted 400,000 books, the product of a massive translation effort in which Greek and Latin classics were rendered into Arabic, the lingua franca of the era. This was a great boon to the Arabic-speaking Jewish philosophers and poets, including Junash ben Labrat, Yehuda Halevi, and Shlomo ibn Gadol. But no golden age lasts forever. In 1086, the Umayyad dynasty was failing, and in order to hold off the Christian armies from the north, they formed an alliance with the Almoravids, a Muslim Berber dynasty who gradually became the dominant political power in Al-Andalus. The Almoravids tended toward asceticism, and they repressed the more permissive Andalusian expression of Islam. After about 40 years, they were replaced by even more repressive fundamentalist Almohads, who transferred the capital from Cordoba to Seville and reigned for nearly 100 years. Their rule was calamitous for both Jews and Christians, who lost the status they had long enjoyed as protected non-Muslims and were given the choice of conversion, death, or exile. Conversion consisted of a public declaration of Muslim faith, though Jews were still allowed to observe Jewish customs in private. When the Almohads crossed into Al-Andalus in 1148, one of the Jewish families impacted was that of Rabbi Maimon ben Yosef of Cordoba, whose brilliant son, Moses ben Maimon, was bar mitzvah age. The family went into exile and spent nearly 10 years moving through southern Spain before settling in Fez in Morocco. Some scholars speculate that the family may have feigned conversion to Islam. In this period, the brilliant son, Moses, wrote his first great work, an authoritative commentary on the Mishnah. Around 1168, he visited the Holy Land and then settled in Egypt, in the city of Fustat outside of Cairo. In 1171, he was appointed as Nagid, leader of the Jewish community in Egypt, at the age of 36. We know him today as Maimonides the Rambam. In this era, the Jews of Morocco are suffering under Almohad rule. One of the forced converts asks a well-known rabbinic authority if, after publicly declaring oneself a Muslim, a person may still practice the mitzvot in private in the hope of accruing merit. The authority sends back a harsh ruling. Anyone who is unwilling to become a martyr and commits the sin of saying the public declaration of Muslim faith would be considered sinning further by doing any of the mitzvot. This ruling reaches the ears of the Rambam, who disagrees most vehemently, calling it a weak and senseless reply, foul in content and form. The Rambam issues a letter on martyrdom in which he discourages people from sacrificing their lives and encourages those who are in danger to flee to a safer place, as his own family had done in his youth. Maimonides has stern words for those unwilling to flee, and this is what he writes. Anyone who cannot leave because of his attachments or because of the dangers of a sea voyage and stays where he is must look upon himself as one who profanes God's name. Not exactly willingly, but almost so. Yet, at the same time, he must bear in mind that if he fulfills a precept, if he does a mitzvah, God will reward him doubly, because he acted so only for God and not to show off or be accepted as an observant individual. A few sentences later in the letter, the Rambam states, it is not right to alienate, scorn, and hate people who desecrate the Sabbath, who do not observe Shabbat mitzvot. It is our duty to befriend them and encourage them to fulfill the commandments. From the Rambam's letter, I draw two simple conclusions that I think are important in contemporary Jewish life and pertinent to our endeavor today. First, that Judaism is not an all or nothing affair. And second, that something is better than nothing. Let us repeat. Judaism is not an all or nothing affair, and something is better than nothing. Though in the past year we've seen Jews tragically lose their lives while practicing mitzvot, still, here in North America, we're not living under the sword and the threat of forced conversion. We have freedom of movement and worship, access to education and opportunity, and relative affluence. And we are enjoying our own golden age of Jewish scholarship and creativity, with our digital resources far outshining the legendary library of Cordova. However, despite the significant advances in health and subsistence across the globe, this has become an era of extremes. With the lamentable rise of fundamentalism in religious communities around the world, we urgently need ministers, priests, imams, and rabbis who are skilled in the fine arts of compromise and accommodation. We need religious leaders who can hold the tension between long-established norms and innovation, between the ideal and the exigencies of the times, between the dream and the reality. We need these wise people to guide us on the challenging, often fearful journey from the past into the future. Judaism is no longer a flourishing international phenomenon. Instead, for the first time in our long history, we are a bipolar community, with the great majority of Jews living in either Israel or North America.